Alderman Moore, Alderman Vaccaro,
Present.
Alderman Cone, Alderman Muhammad, Alderman Oldenburg, Alderwoman Middlebrook, Chairwoman Davis.
Present.
3 present.
I shall excuse the alderpersons that gave us a formal request to be excused. So that is Alderman Oldenburg, Alderman Cone, and Alderwoman Middlebrook. The first thing I'd like to do is to read the rule number 27. This has been designated a public hearing, and so these are the procedures. The first one is, after the presentation of a bill at any public hearing, the proponents and the opponents shall be heard alternately. All persons who wish to testify at a public hearing shall sign a list, which shall be made available by the chairman of the committee at least 1/2 hour before the announced time of the hearing. The initial presentation of any witness shall be no longer than 5 minutes, except with the permission of the committee chairman. But any witness may respond to questions by members of the committee for an additional period of time to be determined by the committee chairman. And any witness may submit written testimony to the committee at any time prior to the conclusion of the hearing on the bill. So that's very clear. One of the things that I have imposed in public hearings, because I make sure that it is a public hearing. So we're not here to debate you. We will not debate you today. It is for you, the public, to have your voice heard. Unless there's some absolute critical thing that requires clarification, there would be no reason for us to have any lengthy conversation at all. I'm asking our committee chairs, and it's worked very well at the Ways and Means public hearing meeting, that we do allow people to speak, and we are not questioning what they are saying, because it's their right to say it. It went well. I think people felt better about it because we were not debating. There's also an opportunity here for us to probably be very lenient on the time today, and as stated, it will not exceed 5 minutes because we don't have as many people as we had anticipated. I also wanted to ask the committee persons that are here, I see that one thing was not added to our agenda, and I'd like to ask your permission to add it. I thought it was important for the legality of this process to be explained by the circuit attorney, Julian Bush. So I'm asking you, committee members, if it's okay to add him to our agenda to explain it.
Yeah, fine. I'm the same subject.
All right, sir. Thank you. Thank you all for your permission. Also, what I'd like to do is to move on. So the next item on our agenda is the approval of our minutes. I hope you've had a chance to peruse them. And if you have, the chair is willing to accept. You don't want to?
We don't have a quorum.
Oh, I can't take a vote. Thank you.
How many do we need for a quorum?
I know, because I'm in my mind.
How many do we
Yeah,
need? John's here. He's in another meeting.
Yeah, he can't come till he gets out of his hearing.
But how many do we need for
Yeah,
a quorum?
we can move on.
We got 3.
Yeah, we can move on. We don't have to do that right now. So we'll delay that. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. So the first and only board bill that we are reviewing for this public hearing today is Board Bill number 19. The sponsor of the board bill is present, and I'd like to ask Alderwoman Spencer if she could come forward and make her presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and members of the committee who are here today. I would like to ask for permission to speak a little longer than 5 minutes.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. As the chairwoman mentioned, what we have before us is Board Bill 19, a bill that will require a public vote in the event that the city decides to move forward with the privatization of St. Louis Lambert International Airport, our city's largest public asset. This bill does not set forth that we will have a public vote, nor does it set forth that we will privatize the airport. This bill simply lays out the framework that if the city moves forward with privatization, we will give the citizens of the city of St. Louis a right to weigh in by way of a public vote. Most airports in the U.S. are publicly owned. In fact, 456 of 457 of them are. This means that they can finance improvements with tax-free municipal bonds and enjoy other public ownership perks. Because the federal government puts so much money into building airports across the country, they generally do not allow or like airports to take federal infrastructure and turn them into profits for the universities or cities that own them. But St. Louis is different. St. Louis, after all, is the birthplace of aviation. St. Louis Lambert International Airport is one of the most historic airports in the United States, if not the first municipal airport in the world. In 1928, St. Louis city voters approved a $2 million bond issue for the purchase of Lambert and for airport improvements. That means we, not the federal government, were responsible and paid for the building of our airport. And because of this early use of tax dollars for the construction of the airport, we are grandfathered into a program of revenue sharing that the vast majority of airports across the country do not enjoy. In fact, we are one of just 12 airports in the country that enjoy this. 12 out of 457 are able to give income back to the cities that own them. In our case, this means that the city of St. Louis enjoys over $6 million, in fact, close to $7 million in revenue a year from our airport, a very unusual arrangement and one that is in jeopardy if we decide to privatize. In order for us to discuss why it is important for the public to vote on such an issue, we must first briefly describe what privatization actually is. In 1996, Congress established the Airport Privatization Pilot Program. Participation in this program has been very limited, in part because major stakeholders in decisions like this have different and often contradictory objectives and interests. In fact, only 2 U.S. commercial service airports have completed the privatization process. One of those, Stewart International Airport, has reverted back to public ownership. In fact, as of last year, there were only 3 active applicants, and according to transportation and privatization privatization expert Dr. Ray Mundi, there's only 1 airport actively seeking privatization, and that is ours. Since participation in the airport privatization pilot program has been very limited, since its inception, we should really take a look at these 2 test airports. The only remaining privatized airport is San Juan in Puerto Rico, the success of which is debatable and remains to be yet seen, but it's hard to really compare to St. Louis because the Puerto Rico economy was in shambles when they decided to privatize. They could not get bonding for the infrastructure the airport needed. They were unable to because their economy was in such shambles. St. Louis is in a quite different situation. In fact, just last week, we approved millions of dollars in bonding for infrastructure for our airport. We are not in the same situation as Puerto Rico at all. The only privatization of a continental U.S. airport, New York Stewart International Airport, was a disaster. Immediately following privatization, Delta, one of their major carriers, pulled out entirely from operating in that airport. And the private operator, within just a couple of years, decided to exit that arrangement. And it subsequently has reverted back to public ownership at great cost to the local taxpayer. Can you imagine, just imagine, if that were to happen here? If we had to suddenly pick up where a private operator decides to leave off? We may get a large lump sum for the lease, but would that really cover us having to take back over operations of a major asset like an airport, this would take millions that we simply do not have. Being a cash-strapped city, it's easy to be allured by the promise of cash windfalls and to pursue public-private partnerships. Our friends in Chicago did this with parking, and we've all seen how that's turned out. Every single elected official who voted for that raw deal is now hanging their heads in shame at the complete boondoggle that has turned out to be for Chicago. But even that city, who tried twice to privatize an airport, didn't pull this trigger. So why would we put that revenue, the almost $7 million a year that we get in income from our airport, at risk? And what is airport privatization? Privatization refers to the shifting of government functions, responsibilities, and sometimes ownership in whole or part to the private sector. Many public airports privatize many aspects of their airports without handing over the full reins. In fact, we could do that here. Airports may engage with the expertise of the private sector. If, for example, we wanted to improve facilities, we could do so. We could hand over parking, terminal concessions, even terminal operations and refueling. In some cases, a private management company has been awarded the contract to manage an entire airport for a specified term. This is still considered partial privatization because at the end of the day, the public entity still has full control or overarching control of the airport. AV Ports out of Virginia, for example, has management service contracts with multiple airports. And for example, at Chicago O'Hare International and Terminal 4 at New York John F. K. International Airports are examples of privatization of financing, operation, and maintenance services. This is a really big deal. We can enhance and improve the function of our airport without handing over the full reins. But full privatization, of course, is a whole new level. One of the most significant differences is that the private operator would have use of sale and lease proceeds. Under non-privatization or partial privatization, the sale or lease of properties for non-airport uses would be considered airport revenue and must be used for airport purposes only. But under full privatization, airport operators could request the approval for sale or lease of properties for non-airport uses. All that beautiful land surrounding Lambert could be sold off by a private operator at great profit for the operator, and the city would be left without it, without this huge land asset. Other important considerations: the public operators are eligible for federal grants for major infrastructure and improvement. Private operators under semi-privatization are still eligible for that, but under full privatization, this comes at a significantly lower cost sharing. This means that the federal government would put less infrastructure into our airport. Rates or charges on airports under full privatization, these would be decided, they could increase significantly, but are regulated heavily under current non-privatized conditions. So how will this affect St. Louis? Well, looking back at the history, the city of St. Louis was once the fourth largest in the nation. Of course, we've lost our competitive advantage in large part because we lost our transportation advantage. Railroads displaced riverboats as a prime means of transportation, and St. Louis leaders bowed to business interests at that time by stifling railroad development to protect the riverboat industry. Chicago, on the other hand, aggressively prepared for this. Airports, as we know, are the railroads of the 21st century, and St. Louis is again looking at our transportation future. The world economy is increasingly moving by air. Experts are projecting that international air service will double in the next 20 years. And large airports in the nation's midsection where we are located, Chicago, Dallas, and Denver, are all leading the nation in delays and canceled flights. We're talking about 30% of flights in the nation's midsection here are delayed. These airports are landlocked and not currently capable of absorbing the doubling of international flights that experts are projecting to be coming to the Midwest. St. Louis is uniquely positioned to accommodate this enormous growth in international and domestic flights. We will need additional air capacity here in the Midwest. And we do not just have one airport, but we have two international airports, Lambert and Mid-America, and we also have a third airport that serves our region in downtown St. Louis, which is currently owned and operated by Bi-State. We need a regional plan for transportation, a regional approach to air travel for our city and for our region's economic health and growth. Selling off one of those, selling off the lease, a long-term privatization lease, shortchanges our region's ability to have a regional approach to transportation and moving cargo along the nation's largest river. So, while we are asking, should we privatize our airport, I believe this is the wrong question to be asking. We should be asking not, can we make a quick buck for our city, but we should be asking how we should be strategically looking at our aviation assets to maximize growth for our region's economy. This is a short-term gain, and we are putting our largest asset in great jeopardy in order to do so. So while I've talked a lot about privatization here and my concerns about it, what this bill does really is bring the public into the conversation here, because we need to discuss whether or not privatization is a good idea, not just for the economy, but for the citizens and the taxpayers of our region. So far, the process has been fraught with conflicts of interest and a lot of controversy. In order to move forward, I think we need a dose of transparency and public engagement. By providing a public vote, we will necessarily start to engage the general public in a more healthy and transparent manner. And therefore, I am looking upon this committee to pledge to the citizens of St. Louis that they too will have a say in the privatization of our largest asset. You know, our job as legislators are to come down here and represent the will of the people that we represent. And largely we do that, but when it comes to really big, enormous decisions like our largest asset, it's time to have a public dialogue about the future of our city and our region. And that is why I think a public vote is paramount to moving forward with this process. We have not made it clear to our public what they get to participate in and what they haven't. And all this does is say that at the end of the day, if it's good enough for the Board of Aldermen, if it's good enough for the general public, then the Board of Aldermen can approve it. But unless it's good enough for the general public, we will not move forward with it. And I think our public deserves a right to participate in a decision this large. And that ends my presentation today, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate the opportunity to present to the committee members who are able to attend here, and I thank you for your time to hear and consider a public vote in the privatization of our airport.
All right, thank you. We do have the opportunity for our committee members to have dialogue with the sponsor, but we will not have dialogue with those who are speaking publicly. So, Alderman Boyd.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. It was very enlightening. I just have one question.
Sure.
In reading, so what would be the date or time frame for an election if this passes?
There isn't a date or time frame. Again, what this bill does is says if the city, it protects the citizens' right to vote if the city moves forward with the privatization of the airport. In much the same way, we could put forward a bill that says if the city decides to sell City Hall, voters would be able to weigh in. It doesn't say that the city would sell City Hall or provide a vote, provide a date for it. It just lays out the framework that if the city were to do that, the voters would have a right to weigh in. Now, the process so far that the consultants have engaged in with regards to the privatization of the airport has been without a timeline, as far as I'm concerned. There has been no timeline shared with the Board of Aldermen or the general public on moving forward. Therefore, we can't even imagine when they may move forward with privatization. So in the same way we could say, hey, if the city were going to build a new football stadium, we'd let the voters decide on that. We wouldn't be able to say when we would get a new football stadium because we don't know what that looks like. In much the same way, we don't know what the process or the timeline of a potential privatization proposal looks like, and therefore we cannot put a timeline on it. It wouldn't be fair to put before voters a concept of privatization without having an actual proposal. We don't have that proposal. What this says is if you want to put forward a proposal to privatize the airport, you got to go to the voters of the city of St. Louis, and I don't care when it happens, I don't care exactly the date, but if you are going to ask the city of St. Louis to privatize its airports, you got to go to the voters first. That's all this says.
Right.
You got to go to the voters first. I don't care when it happens, you got to go to the voters. And if you want to privatize the airport, ask the people first.
Okay, and explain the difference between what we did with the stadium bill with a public vote versus what we're doing now.
In what regard? So, for example, when we were looking at the soccer stadium.
No, let's go back to like football, for example. Didn't we pass a bill?
We did. And that bill says that if we build a new stadium, voters will have a right to decide about their tax dollars. And that is why when we were considering building a soccer stadium with the use tax, this was a year and a half ago, we went before the voters. And the voters said, sorry, Charlie, not a good enough deal for me, I don't want it. And so guess what? We didn't build that soccer stadium. Now we've come back with a proposal without use tax dollars and without the general public input, or without the general public's tax dollars, and they don't get to weigh in on that because it's not the general public's tax dollars per se that's paying for that stadium. But we did assure the voters that if we were going to use their general tax dollars to build a stadium, we would ask them first. And we did. They decided it wasn't good enough for them. So the plan was rejected. In much the same way, we should go to the general public and say, hey, general public, we're thinking about privatizing your airport. How do you feel about that? And give them a right to vote.
Right. So I just want to be clear that that's what we're doing. We're saying if we pass this bill, there's no election unless there's a proposal.
And we don't even know at this point if there will be.
Right.
What this does is gives the general public a little bit of, it gives them the security, the knowledge that we are guaranteeing them that at the end of the day, they will have a right to vote.
Okay.
That's it. No timeline. If we had a timeline, I think we would all feel more comfortable. That is one of the many components to the privatization proposal, or even the concept, that's missing, which makes, frankly, me uncomfortable, and many of the members of the general public uncomfortable, because we don't understand, we don't know what the timeline even is.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're all going to sign on this. It's a feel-good bill, but it does nothing. It doesn't guarantee a vote, because any new alderman, any new board of aldermen can simply amend this bill. I asked you last year, and I'm actually working on it with Megan Green this year, it should be, instead of every time the airport, the stadium, whatever, it should have been a change in the charter. Last year when I asked you, and you were not willing, in order to fix this, to guarantee that the people have a vote, and again, I'm working on that with Megan, and you'll see that bill, then we'll do a change to the city charter so that if a different Board of Aldermen 20 years from now chooses, in the charter, it would say that it has to go, if we're going to change a stadium or whatever. We can't keep doing these one by one by one. And again, and we can ask the judge when he comes up, this does not guarantee that the voters will get the right to vote. It's a board bill that can simply be changed. How many times have you seen board bills that say this money's going here, and then it comes back to the Board of Aldermen, and it says a change from ordinance this, to move this to here. This is simply a board bill, does not guarantee anybody the right to vote. It says, yeah, it could, but then again, this, you know, I think the only way you fix all this is change the charter, which you're unwilling to help me with, or unwilling to do.
Well, Alderman, so if I understand correctly, you have pledged to sign on to this bill despite
Oh, sure,
the
it's a
fact-
feel-good bill, we're all going to sign it, but
I'm
there
really
is no
glad to hear that.
guarantee that this will get a vote to the people.
So you're right. I think, as we mentioned last session, you're absolutely right that a charter change
Should
is
be
the way to go.
It is the way to go.
And I have been willing to work on that and will continue to be willing to work on that with both you and Alderwoman Green. And I'm happy to be roped in whenever you're ready to rope me in, and I will.
Our attorney's working on it right now, and I asked.
And-
And our attorney is here somewhere, he's over in the car. He's working on that now. That's a fix. This is a feel-good.
This-
And so we'll do this one, and we'll all rah, 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 and get everybody all fired up, and then this may go away, and then next time it'll be a football stadium, and we could all rah, 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 change the charter.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and I'm with you on changing the charter.
But you weren't last year. When I actually wanted to do it, when we could have put it on one of the last two ballots we just had, this could be a fix and be done. It's so similar to we got to get everybody out there signing to have the city audited when we knew we can do it by resolution.
Alderman,
I'm just tired
apologize.
of
I didn't.
stirring up people
No.
for no particular reason when we can fix it. That's what we're here for.
If you show me the proposal you've got, I'll sign on to it. But again, was unaware that you had a charter change last year. I apologize if that wasn't communicated or I didn't understand
Oh, I
it.
talked to you very specifically.
You know what? Oh, the charter
That's-
change?
Yes, and I specifically told you, and you said, well, if you want to do it, go ahead, but I'm not participating. That was last year. I talked about it to different folks. The only one that actually sat back with me after Megan was done with her run said, Joe, let's get this done. And I know we're like the unlikely duo, but we've sat down with our attorney here at the board, and we're working on language to change the charter, which is an actual real fix. And again, this is not a real fix. This can be changed by any one of the Board of Aldermen again over and over. But we'll all sign on it.
I'm glad to hear you'll sign on, Alderman. Thank you so much.
You can put me on as a co-sponsor.
I-
It's a useless bill.
Clerk, if you don't,
That's a useless.
Mr. Galley, if you don't mind, would you add the Alderman from the 23rd as a co-sponsor to the bill?
You put me on it, but again, it does nothing. But it's a feel-good bill, so we'll...
Madam Chairwoman, do you have any questions for me?
I do, but I'm going to respect Alderman Muhammad. I didn't know if he wanted to weigh in on this. Do you have any comments or any questions or anything? And if you'd like to hold on a moment, I'll go ahead and do
No.
I only have a couple of statements to make.
Thank you,
Is that
Madam
too-
Chairwoman. I yield back.
All right, sir. So I only had a couple of things. We still don't have the correct language for the FAA in this bill. They changed everything. There's a new law that is referred to. It was passed in, I think it was September, October of 2018. This is not the right law that's being referenced to in this bill.
There was an update to the FAA under the...
Still says 2012.
You're right. So the Trump administration has been trying to move privatization forward and make it a little easier for cities. That is true. So under the Trump administration, the FAA guidelines has changed slightly. Mr. Galley, would you mind updating the bill to reflect that amendment and the federal guidelines regarding the FAA? Could we update the language in the bill? Could we get that as an amendment before the next hearing? Thank you. I think we did talk about that at the last
We did.
session.
We talked about it last time. So also, would you like to clarify a little bit more, because people are confused by the presentation because they believe that tax dollars run the airport. So would you like to clarify that it doesn't?
The airport is an enterprise fund, which means that the money that goes into it stays into it. It's sort of a net zero function. Our current tax dollars do not go into running the airport, but the citizens of St. Louis, historically, and with our tax dollars, built the airport. As I mentioned, in 1928, we passed a bond, the citywide voters passed a bond, $2 million at that time, to build and buy the airport. That was in 1928, yes, just as much as the city.
It was a private airport. All airports were private in the United States of America, and they started coming into municipalities in the 50s. All airports were private.
The city of St. Louis, the voters in the city of St. Louis in 1928 voted to issue a $2 million bond to buy and build out Lambert Airport.
To supplement the private airport.
Voters, the tax dollars, much like at that time
The
we
only
built.
money, the enterprise system of an airport, and for everyone's benefit, if you never buy an airline ticket, you've never contributed anything to the airport in any form or fashion.
Unless you were born before
It
1928.
is an enterprise system, and it's funded by the airlines' payments for the space that they use. It's the money that comes off of tickets, but we do not put your public tax dollars into the airport. That needs to be clear because, when you say to people, your tax dollars, it's not your tax dollars. Our airport is its own enterprise, and we don't put your tax dollars in it.
Well, in much the same way, parking is an enterprise fund. If you never pay a parking ticket, you are not paying into that system. But that is still public infrastructure, and those dollars that go into our parking fund are still public dollars, are they not? They are. I think the alderman from the 22nd would agree with me that parking revenue is public revenue. But if you never pay a parking ticket, you're not paying into that. It's much the same way. We have three enterprise funds in the city of St. Louis: the water department, the parking division, and the airport. And you're right, if you don't participate in it, you don't pay into it, doesn't mean it's not public money, nor does it mean it's not public assets.
Do we take money out of our general fund to supplement the airport in any form or fashion?
To my knowledge, we do not. And to my knowledge, in fact, the airport supplements our general fund with $6 to $7 million a year. And in the same way, we don't take general fund and supplement our parking division. That still does not mean that those parking dollars are not public dollars. They are, because they are generated with public assets.
And as far as not knowing, just for clarity, I think in all the public hearings, and we did about 40 of them, in every document that has been given to anybody and on the website, it has the schedule for this process. And so, yes, we are aware. We've always said from day one, it would be a minimum of 24 months for the process to take place. And we also said, and we've been giving updates at every working group meeting for the airport. And so those are taped. The public has an opportunity to look at them and gather all information. I've got some people who watch it religiously, and they will email me or call me or text me, and if they didn't like something I said or they thought something should be changed, they do that. So it's public information that it's a minimum of 24 months for the process to determine everything. All the information has been very clear. We've also gone out of our way to make sure that we went to every part of the city to talk to individuals. We've also made it, we've gone to the airport twice to talk to employees there at the airport because we wanted to make sure they had an up-close one-on-one for clarity on anything that they had any concerns about. We and that's not over. I mean, that's not over at all. And it never will be. We'll continue to be very public with information. So if there was anyone here who did not know that, that is, and we're behind schedule too. Some people probably knew because I talked very public about it about 3-4 months ago that we were behind schedule. So then we started meeting every week to try to get caught up on the work that needed to be done so that we could get to a determined place. And believe it or not, that didn't work, so we're still behind. But we know that it is a minimum process of 24 months. We are at the 8th month on the schedule right now. So if you look at it, the mark should be moved to the 8th month on there. And we will continue to update it as regularly as we make progress. And again, if for some reason you don't have access to look at it online, feel free to email me or call me. As you know, I give out my cell phone number in public. I'm not trying to ever hide from anybody for anything. So for those of you who have a pen and paper and you'd like to talk to me at length about this, I am so open. Or if you'd like to text me back and forth, if you have time, I answer all communication. My cell phone number is area code 314-680-9168. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, if you get too jazzy on there with some certain words and things, I'm going to get jazzy with you, okay? So I'd appreciate us being respectful to each other, all right? But other than that, those were just the two things that I wanted to bring a little clarity to, that so that people could understand those two items. Okay?
Understood.
Alderman Muhammad?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have no questions for the sponsor.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, then we can move forward unless you have something else you need to add.
I wouldn't add anything, no, other than just to, I appreciate the clarification about enterprise funds. I still very much maintain that public assets are public assets. The water department, again, is a enterprise fund, much like the airport. We do not put tax dollars into it. However, when we looked at privatizing that asset I think it was 6 years ago, we came to a similar conclusion. Just because it's not because tax dollars don't go into it does not mean it's not a public asset. And in the case of the airport, one that generates quite a bit of revenue for the city, as it is. And I'd hate to see our enterprise fund of the airport go by way of the enterprise fund of parking in Chicago, which also generated money for the city, got a windfall of cash they burned through in just a year's time, and then became a major, major problem for that city. So, with that, I will defer to the general public on their testimony on the issue.
Thank you. Alderman Muhammad, you weren't here when we were talking about our agenda. We did add to the agenda that Jillian Bush from our Circuit Attorney's Office will speak and give some clarity on the legality of this process. Attorney.
Thank you. My name is Julian Bush. I am the city councilor.
Oh, that's right, City Councilor.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
There's so much conversation on that, okay, you're right.
Thank you very much for inviting me to come and visit with you. I'm not often asked, but I always enjoy an opportunity to chat with you. Let me, at the outset, make a caveat about all the remarks I'm going to make about the board bill and the prospect of submitting the issue to the voters.
Move the mic up a little bit,
All right.
please.
It was only, I think, 2 days ago that I was asked to look into this matter. It's a very important matter. It's a very complicated matter. So I want you to understand that I have not made a complete review of the issue, which requires mature judgment. So all of the remarks I'm going to make should be understood as tentative, subject to revision after more consideration is given to them.
Let's clear up something else. You
Sure.
are a part of the process in the beginning in putting the draft application together in order to start this procedure.
The original application was made during the slate.
I know I'm talking about the contract in order for
Yes,
the
I
work
was.
to start.
I'm talking about the issue of, is it Board Bill 17? 19?
19,
And the issue of whether or not this could be submitted to the voters, it
Right.
was first presented to me 2 days ago.
Right.
So I just want to have this caveat that, after it's given more thought, my views may change a little bit. But the first thing that I asked myself is, regardless of the merits and demerits of a particular bill that's been presented to you by Alderman Spencer, there's a preliminary question as to whether or not the voters can vote pursuant to a bill such as this on the issue of whether or not the airport can be privatized. And I have very serious reservations about whether or not this bill even has the efficacy that Alderman Vaccaro has assigned to it. There's a doctrine in the law called the doctrine of unlawful delegation of powers. And that essentially holds that when a public official or a public body is given a responsibility or a power, that particular public official or public body has to exercise that power themselves and can't delegate it to another. For example, I'm sure all of you have read that there is a fast and furious lawsuit pending before Judge Stelzer regarding Missouri's, regarding the Planned Parenthood facility on Forest Park Boulevard. That's a lawsuit, and the Missouri Constitution gives judges the responsibility of deciding lawsuits. Judge Stelzer does not have the ability to say, well, this is a really difficult lawsuit. I'd rather not decide it. Let me assign it to the Recorder of Deeds. That would be an unlawful delegation of power. Similarly, I am the city councilor. I have the function of reviewing all contracts of the city to approve or disapprove them as to form. I couldn't decide that, this is kind of boring. I don't like this part of my job. I'm going to assign that to Transportation Committee. I can't do that because the city charter has placed that power with me. Likewise, the Board of Aldermen cannot decide that a particular piece of legislation is so important or so complicated that it really doesn't want to decide whether or not it should be adopted. It couldn't decide that a particular piece of legislation should be approved or disapproved by the assessor, the governor, the Civil Service Commission. That's something for the Board of Aldermen to decide. The mayor couldn't say, well, I'm going to take the summer off, and my job I normally have of approving or disapproving legislation, in other words, vetoing legislation, is something that I'm going to be too busy for this summer. I'm going to assign that to the city councilor. No, that's an unlawful delegation. All of us in public life have to perform the duties that have been assigned to us and cannot delegate them to another. In my judgment, for the Board of Aldermen, under the city charter, and this is, Alderman Vaccaro really stole some of my thunder here. I don't think he has a law degree, but maybe he does.
But I just know if you got to change the charter.
So the city charter, subject to some caveats and some exceptions, places the legislative authority of the city in its Board of Aldermen. All right, and the Board of Aldermen cannot decide that some legislation is too much for it. It should be decided by the Recorder of Deeds or the mayor or the city councilor or even the people and voters of the city of St. Louis. The charter, as it is today, places with the Board of Aldermen ultimately the authority whether or not the airport should be privatized. And I have serious reservations about the ability of the Board of Aldermen to delegate that power to the people or anybody else or any other body. So whatever the merits and demerits of the way this particular bill was drafted, I don't think this is something that could be done even by a bill, let me choose my words carefully. I think Alderman Spencer's bill could be improved. Like all bills can be improved. She's not here? Well, maybe I don't have to be, okay.
We've been trying to just do that.
And I'm sure that if it's something that could be done, I'm sure that I know Alderman Spencer, and I'm sure she'd be open to tinkering with it and making some improvements if she was persuaded that they ought to be made. But I don't really think it could be tinkered with. the charter, in order to make it a valid ordinance, it's just like Alderman Vaccaro said. A charter amendment is really what's required. The charter could be amended to say something like, no ordinance privatizing the airport shall be valid until such time as is approved by the voters. That would be perfectly valid because the charter controls the distribution of powers within the city government. But it cannot really be done by ordinance. It has to be done by a charter amendment, in my view. And that's the most important thing I have to say to you. I think if it could be done by ordinance, which I don't believe it could be done by ordinance, I think there are some problems with the way this bill has been drafted, which could be fixed. I don't have a comprehensive view of it, but just by way of example, it requires a vote if a proposal is made. There's no definition of what a proposal is. Has privatization been proposed? If Alderman Davis, your committee proposes a change, or is it proposed when the Board of Estimate and Apportionment recommends the change? Is proposed when a bill is introduced into the Board of Aldermen? Is proposed after the second reading, the third reading? You know, more definition has to be done. And there are other things like that in the bill that I think have to be tinkered with. But in my view, no amount of tinkering can be done that would permit the Board of Aldermen by ordinance to delegate its authority to legislate to the people. The people do have authority to legislate by initiative petition and by referendum. But the Board of Aldermen cannot adopt an ordinance. It's a general proposition, and there are exceptions, that's contingent upon the voter approval because the voters don't have the authority to legislate outside of the initiative and referendum processes. And that's the most important thing I think I have to tell you. So again, with a caveat that all of my thoughts I've advanced today are preliminary and incomplete, and I, you know, if you ask me to, I will be deliberating upon these matters at greater length, and I will share my conclusions with you after I've concluded my investigation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, I'll go to the committee first. Alderman Boyd.
Yes, good morning. Referendum. Is a referendum something that can only come from the people?
Yes, that's
Okay.
that's exactly right. That's the problem here. Essentially, what Alderman Spencer has done is she's proposed that the Board of Aldermen call a referendum on this issue, and the charter doesn't permit it. It only permits it to come from the people, and there's a process. And that's, you know, if you should adopt an ordinance privatizing the airport, if the people wish to call a referendum, they might be able to do it. There's a complicated legal question involved and there's some uncertainty as to whether such an ordinance would be subject to the referendum. My short answer is probably.
Okay.
But you're right. It's really a referendum being called by the Board of Aldermen.
And we can certainly do a
Yes.
binding referendum? Is that
Yes,
the right?
yes, I agree with that. If you could do what they did in England, which has actually been a disaster. They had a non-binding resolution to consider the abstract question of whether or not England should or the United Kingdom really should withdraw from Brexit, from the European community. And you know, it wasn't a concrete proposal. The voters were deciding whether to adopt or not. It was just an abstraction, which has caused endless problems. But I see no impediment for the Board of Aldermen, if it chose, to submit to the voters a non-binding resolution of whether or not the airport should be privatized. And each of you could think that that was something important for you to listen to when you voted on a bill to privatize the airport. Some of you might think, well, If 95% of the voters don't like it, I don't like it either. Some of you might think, well, if there's only 51, it's 49 to 51, it's not that interesting to me, but that would be non-binding. I think that would be in order, but it would be non-binding. It's your decision whether the airport should be
forward or not.
Yeah, it's your decision whether the airport should be privatized.
Oh, last question. As the city councilor, is it your responsibility to advise the mayor on legislation that you think that may not be appropriate? In other words, if you thought a piece of legislation was passed by the Board of Aldermen and it was not within the law or outside the boundaries, would you recommend to the mayor to veto that legislation? Was that one of your roles?
My role is to find the city charter, and it's my responsibility to offer opinions to certain people that request opinions. The mayor is a person who can request my opinion. All department heads can request opinions, and the Board of Aldermen. I don't remember if individual aldermen can. I know heads of committees can. I know the Board of Aldermen as a general can. I think I've never said to an alderman I would not offer an opinion.
Right.
So if any of you or the mayor or any department head were to ask me for my opinion as to the lawfulness of any particular proposal of any kind, this bill, any other bill, I will give you my opinion.
But at the end of the day, going back to something that you said, since we are duly elected, you would offer your opinion, but we would still exercise our authority whether or not we're going to do it or not do it.
I would give you my opinion, but your vote is for you to determine.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Wow.
So, again, this bill, and tell me if I'm wrong, even if we were to pass this, another group of aldermen can, because this doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't guarantee a right, because it's nothing other than a board bill that could be changed by another group of aldermen at any time. My other issue with this, and again, if we try this, first off, if 3 weeks from now they come through, then we're going to privatize the airport 3 weeks from now, we would have to find the money for an election. The group that wants to do this, which I'm not for the privatization of the airport, but it doesn't matter, but that group would sue. The airport, by the time it got out of court, would be, we would lose, I don't know, but the only thing I guess I'm asking is, does this even guarantee that it would go to the voters? Or does it only guarantee that another group of aldermen or any one committee, like Rules and Engrossment, could say we're not going to engross this bill?
Let me answer that this way. There's two aspects of it. If this bill should be adopted, and if my preliminary opinion is correct that it's not valid, it will never go to the voters if it should be challenged in court. All right. If I'm wrong, and this bill is valid, there's nothing to prohibit the Board of Aldermen from, selling, adopting an ordinance, selling the airport, repealing this, selling the airport. This is just
the law.
This is
we
just
cannot sell the airport.
Well,
We can't sell it. There's no such thing.
the federal regulations, I don't have any opinion about that. But let me just say privatize the airport. But that's why it needs to be a charter amendment. The charter can confine the Board of Aldermen to adopting this ordinance or that ordinance or another ordinance. But this is just an ordinance. Boards of Aldermen amend ordinances, repeal ordinances. They do it all the time. This really, for those people, I have no opinion whether or not this issue should be submitted to the voters, but this should be done by a charter amendment.
That's what I said last year. It would already be done by now. I think they like keeping these things out. It keeps a certain base stimulated. I think we can correct everything at one time by simply changing the charter, which I asked last year from the sponsor of this bill. You didn't hear her deny it. I asked last year, let's change the charter, and I was told no. And I think it's an opinion, it's not a fact, but I do believe when they start doing all these things, it keeps a certain base stimulated. I think we change the charter, fix the problems, all of them, and then they go away, and then that's it, and that's just my opinion. I'm glad to see she's willing to jump on board with me and Megan this year.
I guess, you done, sir?
Yeah, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I just had a few comments. Our success in changing charter amendments in this city has been pretty dismal. I can only remember one that we've changed in the last 40 years. So, but that's the law. That's how it works. That's how we're structured. And we can look at that. And I do remember you asking that.
We did have to change the charter to reduce the Board of Aldermen. And
I can say it has been amended more than once, I know that.
I'm talking about recently.
The last 40 years, it's been amended more than once.
Was it?
I just
Sure.
want, well, no, we did amend the charter to change the amount of aldermen, to go from 28 to 14.
Right, that was a charter amendment.
Now, there's a group of aldermen, I'm including that, believe it should stay at 28. But because we did it the right way and we did it by a charter amendment, the aldermen can't come back and say, oh, we're going to change that ordinance and keep 28. In order to go back to 28, since we changed the charter, we have to go back to the voters.
Yeah.
So,
The charter was amended in the late 80s or early 80s to change the budget process, I know that. And I believe it's also amended, the civil service article was amended to, at the very least, make certain positions in the mayor's office, I forget what the language is, accepted positions in the city service or something like that. And maybe some other people too. There maybe some of your people, but there have been several amendments,
Okay.
but not many.
No, I'm
Bigger
just
point
thinking
is-
about the big ones that
yeah.
we tried and failed on all of them. So that's one comment, but I have to admit that Alderman Vaccaro tried and many actually talked to all of us about it. And, but again, you have to respect people, however they want to move forward with their bills, we allow that. And I also want to clarify too.
where did you get the stop sign?
Guys, can we wait for that conversation? Excuse me. Excuse me. They didn't hear me. But anyway, one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about the current structure of the airport is that all services at the airport are privatized if you look at how it's run now. We don't pay for all of those services that are at the airport. And also, there's about 7,000 people that work and run the airport, and only 530 of those work for the city of St. Louis. So technically, it is private already. Having a management group and/or investors is what we're talking about. So it's not about anything else. It's an economic stimulus that has smart thinking. It's being done not only with this type of operation here, but many others. And it allows you to have the opportunity for that airport to get out of debt. I asked them to run the numbers for me because currently we have about, I think we're right at $700 and something million of debt out there that we've been paying on for at a large rate for over 25 years. That is absolutely insane. And then you look at the structure itself and the condition it's in. And there's an article out here which I will put on the website where there's been an estimate made of how much money it would take to bring all of the airports in the United States into a more modern operative mode, because most of them are suffering. There is no one entity that can afford to bring their airport into the state of operation that they would like for it to be in. and most especially looking at the future as far as safety is concerned, and the things that we need to improve on at our airports. So for those who didn't know that, only 500 and about 30 of those people work for the city of St. Louis and are the actual operators of the airport. They all work for a private entity, so it's already privatized. I think that's it for me. Did you have anything else, Alderman Boyd?
Not really. I'm sitting here trying to understand how the airport is private. I'm not sure if I'm convinced that the airport is a private.
I'm talking about who works for who. They don't work for us.
Right, but it's managed by the city of St. Louis. The city of St. Louis has all authority on the operations of.
We don't manage any of those private businesses.
No, we don't. There's a lot of subcontracting
Right, we don't
of
manage
services out at the airport, which is different than whether or not the airport belongs to a corporation and a private corporation.
And it will still belong to us. We will just simply have a management and investment opportunity.
Right, no, I agree with that, but I don't want, I'm sitting here being confused, and I'm just willing to listen,
Yes, sir.
to all the information that's being presented. But I know in my initial mind, the airport is not a corporation on its own that's managed by private entities that subcontract to the city of St. Louis to provide services. Rhonda, the airport director, is certainly an employee of the city of St. Louis, and as well as 500 other employees with the city of St. Louis. It's such a huge enterprise that it wouldn't be feasible, certainly, for us to have the city of St. Louis managing 100% of what goes on out at the airport. But I struggle with, and I'm not trying to say you're wrong, but I'm just saying I struggle with the notion that the airport is somehow private in a blanket statement.
No, and I did not make a blanket
I
statement.
don't want to
simply
confuse
said
the
that
public or
They
myself.
don't work for the city, and a lot of people were afraid that those thousands of people were going to lose their jobs.
Well, that's
and
absolutely
I just wanted
true.
to clear that up.
Well, that's
Yeah.
absolutely true. But if it's leased to a private corporation, then certainly those 500 people were going to lose their jobs and have to reapply. I mean, they may lose their employment. Let me say it this way. Chances are they will lose their employment with the city of St. Louis, but they may continue their employment at the airport with a private entity. I mean, that's certainly possible, and that happens quite a bit. Case in point, the parking division, when it decided to outsource the collection of the coins out the meters and maintenance and all of that, they were city employees. And when they decided to privatize that enterprise, that portion of the enterprise, they became employees of a private corporation. But that doesn't suggest that the parking division is already private because they can privatize certain functions. Just kind of want to create a balance to the discussion
Absolutely.
on that, because I'm always about educating the public and educating myself, and I'm not always right about everything, but I try to be logical in how I process information, and that just sounded kind of confusing to me that the airport is already private. So I just kind of wanted to make that statement.
Well, the clarity definitely needs to be there. I didn't want anybody to believe that 7,000 people would lose their jobs.
And that clears it up for me.
Yes, sir.
It's just because I walk away thinking that, oh, wow, it's already private.
Yeah.
So.
And the other thing about it, too, is it's not like I invest my money into improving this operation, but I'm going to close it down today until I replace every employee. That doesn't make any common sense either. And it wouldn't work within the system of the United States and the international, because the airport has to run every day. So that's not even a possibility to even think about. So I appreciate you with your clarity as well. Did you have anything else you need to add, sir?
I don't. Thank you
Okay.
very much for inviting me to talk to you.
Okay, and we will suggest that you continue to look at this, because as we continue to move forward, I think Alderman Vaccaro has said it loud and clear. He's been saying it for a year, but I think that that is something we would have to look at.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Let's start with the public speaking. Now, according to the list that I have here, we have wait a minute, let me make sure I get this right. We only have 3 speakers. And so that's a short period of time. So I shall allow you to exceed my 3 minutes because we only have 3 speakers, okay? And let's try to move forward here. And I am having... Okay, so is this Richard Von Klon? All right.
Sorry, my penmanship is not always
It's interesting.
great.
Interesting.
Tricky name with tricky penmanship.
Yes.
So I appreciate the opportunity to testify, Madam Chair and Alderman Vaccaro and Alderman Boyd. So my name is Richard Von Glahn. I'm the Policy Director for Missouri Jobs with Justice, and I am here to testify in support of Board Bill 19. Jobs with Justice is deeply concerned about the implications of a public-private partnership on our region's largest and most valuable asset, the airport. We share the concerns of some of our partners in the labor movement about the potential negative impacts to working families in our community on such a deal, whether they are direct employees of the airport or whether they are already contracted, as you mentioned. But we are actually here to testify today to a broader point in opposition regarding the ceding of public control of one of our assets. There is no public-private partnership of public infrastructure in this country that does not prioritize the needs of investors above all else. Most, if not all, of these contracts have clauses that guarantee minimum profits or investor returns. These clauses limit the ability of the public to make critical decisions on issues of land use, economic development, and the climate. Given the uncertainty about how transportation might evolve or what climate policy we might want to address in the coming years, it would be foolish for any private agency. If I was an investor, I wouldn't agree to take something on if I didn't have total control and I couldn't guarantee a strong investment or strong return on my investment. That's a logical expectation to have of an investor. It will be no different for this proposal. But this loss of public control can have really far-reaching consequences. Alderwoman Spencer gave the example of the Chicago parking meters to a private entity, and the city lost control around decisions on transit and land use and other things when they did that. It is at the point in Chicago that the city has to actually rent and pay the investor in order to close down a street if they want to have a festival or something on their on one of those streets, because there is a guaranteed economic return for those investors. And that could be an absolute devastation with the airport. When we think about contracts, and contracts are rigid documents, and it does not allow the aldermen here, the public, to continue to have the flexibility that you need to be able to make the best decisions to serve the public interest. This loss of control is simply not necessary. There is nothing that a private manager of the airport can do that the current management and the structure of the airport is unable to do. The biggest change in a public-private partnership is who has the authority and whose needs are prioritized. Jobs with Justice believes that public assets should be managed by publicly accountable bodies so that the needs of our community can always be the driving force behind decision makers. Reporting on the issue of airport privatization has already raised numerous red flags about who this proposal could benefit and why. Any decision that could be made to cede public authority over a public asset must be evaluated and voted on by the public, because it is we who are going to have to deal with the long-term consequences of that decision. If proponents of this deal believe it is a good deal, they should have no fear of close examination from members of the public to look on it and take a public vote, whether a public vote is binding or whether a public vote is advisory, or whether we should do this as an ordinance or whether we should do this as a charter change. I think the issues are all the same. I would, without a specific proposal, but I would venture we would probably support a charter change as well in endorsing that. But the secrecy of this process to date does not build confidence in our organization or in the public, and we think that should be another reason that it should encourage you to support this bill and to say, let's bring the public in, let's give the public an opportunity to have a voice about what should happen with our public asset here. So I thank you for your consideration and for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I think you had something.
Yeah, and again, I think we're on the same page. Understand that this board bill does not do anything or guarantee anything. If you're going to fix the problem, it has to be a charter change. The other thing that I agree with the Alderwoman, and I actually probably wouldn't mind getting the numbers, but a bigger percent of what we do at that airport is outsourced. Mm-hmm. Very few city employees actually work there. There's some field maintenance people, but most of everything out there is outsourced. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how many people it would affect. I do have some issue with that because of pensions and whatnot, and I guess we can probably get that number. But again, my belief, and I mean, I really looked into it last year, my understanding, my belief, that any board bill we do, first off, it could be changed by any group of aldermen at any time. It can be shut down, but it's a feel-good bill. That's why we'll all sign on it. We're all going to say, hey, thumbs up. But it does nothing. Understand that this bill does not accomplish what you're looking for. The charter change to add the stadiums and all the things under how we do things is real change. This is nothing more than a feel-good, rah-rah bill that will be challenged if we do it, and we'll lose. The city councilor was a judge, but I did talk to, I can tell you, pass this bill, try it, we're going to get sued, we go nowhere. There's also that the money that you would have to, let's just pretend and pass it. Well, pass it anyway, what difference does it make? There's no money for an election. It would call for a special election. That means you'd have to find a way. Then there's going to have to be money to defend it. We already know that the city councilor already believes it's indefensible. So let's pass it. I mean, we pass it and we lose, and that's good, and everybody feels good, and I can say, oh yeah, I voted for that. It does nothing. Let's just pass this bill, and let's skip the charter change. I think that's probably the best thing to do. We can all go how great we are, but I can tell you this bill does nothing, and it'll lose.
As I mentioned, Alderman, if there's a proposal around a charter change that addresses some of our concerns, I would be happy to look at it. I imagine you would probably get the support of our organization because we do believe that public assets are important to be publicly changed. But that's not the bill that's being heard today.
Well, no, that's fine. And again, I'm giving you my opinion of this bill.
I understand.
I say we pass this bill.
I understand,
it'll go nowhere,
and I
but this
appreciate
bill,
that. In terms of legality and different issues, I mean, I know you and I have had disagreements before on legality of issues that this...
Sure, on the minimum wage, which I felt that the city is, I'm for state-run minimum wage. Mm-hmm. And I said that. And I said I would support and even help state-run. But the city of St. Louis, which I knew we could not do, and we did, and we got got beat up because we did it. And I think a lot of
Ultimately,
these
the
things-
Missouri Supreme Court had a unanimous decision that the minimum wage in the city of St. Louis was legal.
And so,
Did go into effect, and it did provide
for a whole
raises.
week, we didn't.
It went into effect for 2.5 months and provided
2.5
raises
months.
for approximately 30,000 people. It's something that I think
But
all
also-
of the alderwomen,
but
all the
also-
aldermen and women that voted for should be very proud of. So I say that just to say there can be disagreements about legal opinion and whether or not something should move forward or not. But if ultimately we agree with the underlying issue, that we could move forward, that's something that we could move forward on.
you know,
And in regards to your issue about whether or not a different board could come in and
Oh, no, I
change
guarantee
things,
that.
that's true about any law,
It's
any
not.
ordinance we ever.
No, it's not. If it's a charter change,
If it's a charter change, any law,
just like
any
cutting,
ordinance,
just
whatever
like they
gets
do
passed
in the
by
Board
this-
of Aldermen, and I was asked not to debate this, so we're not.
I don't want to.
So, I guarantee you a charter change is the only legal way. But let's pass this and let's see where it goes.
I think this would be a wonderful bill to pass. It would give the opportunity for the public to weigh in. It would give,
The public is not going to weigh in on this bill. It's just going to get challenged and go away.
The charter does.
It is not it's not the way to do it. The charter's the only way. But let's just do this way because then I could at the end of this go, I was right, see?
you could say, we tried this and we also did the charter change. It's wonderful to take multiple opportunities to try to make sure that we secure what is the important thing here is that the public has a chance to weigh in on this. Whether we weigh in on it through an ordinance, through a charter change, the important thing from our organization is that the public has an opportunity to weigh in and voice why it is important that the public maintain control and authority over our assets.
Was there anything else, sir, that you
I
wanted
was
to add?
asked not to debate it.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you, thank you.
The next person is Matt Sims.
Thanks for allowing us to have input into this and being able to talk to you today. I'm going to keep it brief. There's no way I can top any of the speeches or the explanations that happened earlier, so I'll just be succinct with what I want to say. To put it simply, our city deserves a chance to vote on whether our airport is privatized or managed by a private entity. Whether it's with this bill or a charter amendment or the petition that's going around, it's going to happen. So I think you guys collectively get a chance to either back the public and allow input into it. I'll finish my thing and then I'll be done. Then I'm not going to argue or discuss it.
No, not. I just say you're right.
Could I finish this and just get this out of my system? Thank you. Would allowing a vote scare off investors? I've heard that tossed around, but we've already had major investors back out of this deal. That's been publicly documented by the Post-Dispatch, other media. I think you have a chance here to basically allow the public to have a say if it's a good deal. If it's not a good deal, we should be able to walk away from it. And that's basically it. The public deserves a vote. That's the only thing I want to have.
Because until we know if there is a deal.
Yeah, so they should be able to craft it. They should be able to craft a good enough deal that we get to vote on it. But then why would the effort to stop a public vote even be part of this discussion? This should be, yes, the public can vote because we're going to find a good deal. That has not been the case.
Yeah. That was the part that I also wanted included in this. Because there's no sense voting on something and you haven't even looked at what it is. We don't know what it is.
Yeah, they should be able to craft a good enough plan that we want to vote on it.
We don't have that conclusion yet for you to make that decision.
Yeah, if there's secret meetings and discussions where there's no public input involved, you've privatized the ability for us to even be able to vote on this.
That's why the documents need to be concluded and put together for presentation.
What's wrong with a safety net of a public vote then?
Yeah.
Is there anything wrong? Is there anything wrong with a safety net of a public vote, regardless of whatever the deal is? What's the harm in the safety net of a public vote?
I see what you're saying. So irregardless to whether there is a deal or not.
Regardless of whatever the deal is, why is the public vote a bad?
I'm fine if that's what the conclusion is.
Okay, it's going to happen either through the petition, charter, or by this bill, one way or another.
Well, and we agree on almost everything.
Yep.
Except this bill, which I'm voting for.
If you mention the charter and the bill and the difference between those again, you've mentioned that about 5+ times now. Is there anything else to add beyond that?
But the other thing you mentioned is also by ballot petition, and that's the two ways to legally change this.
Okay.
So you're right, ballot petition.
Okay, well then,
Charter
there'll be a
changes.
vote
So
on
in
it
2
one way or
ways.
another then.
Very good.
Right.
Right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much.
He's the only guy left.
Last name is Dooney. They may have left with the other group.
Were you to talk?
And then Lucas, is Lucas still here? Lucas? They may have left with the other group too. Okay. Well, that's all that signed on.
Does anybody else want to say anything? They can.
Did you need to speak, sir? I'm sorry. Okay. Did you need to speak? No? In a different form, maybe. All right, in a different form. Okay, all righty. So I appreciate the attendance of those who were able to attend for the committee, and I am adjourning this meeting. Thank you. So you